hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram, JFK Junior Forum, for behind-the-scenes highlights. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guests and IOP Director, Mark Guerin.
Great. Thank you, Blake, and good afternoon. Welcome to the JFK Junior Forum. We warmly welcome you here for a really rich and interesting afternoon conversation about public service, the legacy of public service, about bipartisanship, about talking across differences with two strongly held views and the capacity to do that. And so we're very grateful for our guests that I'll bring forth, and we warmly welcome you here. This has been a great start to the Institute of Politics. We had our opening forum here on Wednesday with Coach Steve Kerr, and we have many events scheduled for next week, so we invite you back. Our fellows, resident fellows, are arriving, and we warmly welcome Governor Bill Walker, who just arrived from Alaska, the independent governor of Alaska, who will be here this spring as one of our resident fellows. But this afternoon, we're fortunate to have Mrs. Cindy McCain and Mrs. Vicki Kennedy in conversation about public service and the legacy of public service. And of course, Mrs. McCain has dedicated her life to improving those who are less fortunate globally, doing significant global work and trafficking and other issues. She's the chair of the board of the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University, where she oversees the organization's focus on character-driven global leadership, on security and economic opportunity, and freedom and human rights issues. She's also chairs the Institute's Human Trafficking Advisory Council. Mrs. Vicki Kennedy is both an accomplished attorney and not-for-profit leader. She's the senior counsel of Greenberg Traurig, and she advises clients on government issues and regulatory issues. She is the president of the board and the co-founder of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the Study of the Senate, a nonpartisan and nonprofit, dazzlingly beautiful building right here in Boston at Columbia Point that educates the public about the unique role of the United States Senate in our democracy. And tonight, they will both be in conversation with Kerry Healey, who is the inaugural president of the Center for Advancing the American Dream at the Milken Institute, opening in 2022. Those of us in Massachusetts know of her public leadership well. She was former lieutenant governor. She was the president, college president as well, and with pride, she was a former resident fellow here at the Institute of Politics. So join me in welcoming Lieutenant Governor Healey with Mrs. McCain and Vicki Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you for those kind introductions, and I am so excited to be able to have this conversation with both of you today. I think with the backdrop of everything that is going on in the country right now, one of the most interesting legacies of both of your husbands is that they actually got along, and they were fiercely partisan. They were fiercely partisan, there's no doubt about that. They wanted to win, but how was that relationship, both in public and in private?
Well, what you have to remember at the time, the Senate was a much different place. It was a body of leaders that were obviously very passionate about what they believed in, their home states, their constituencies, et cetera, and the world, but they also were friends. Fierce debates took place, especially between my husband and Vicki's husband. Because they believed in what it was, but they were never enemies. They were friends, and they would walk off the floor. How many times did we see them slap each other's back and go laughing, all the way off the floor? It's a different time, and I'm sad about that.
Yeah. Vicki, how do you remember it?
Well, John himself said that he didn't like Teddy very much when he first met him. He said, I really maybe saw a lot of myself in him. Yeah. I don't think that, but he said he grew to respect him. They were both on the Armed Services Committee, and he saw in Teddy, and Teddy saw in John, real patriotism, love of this country. And even though they came at it from a different place, they both knew that they cared about the country and they loved it. And they just developed a bond, and they found these little nuggets of common ground where they could work together. And it was sea power is one of the things that they worked on, or it was immigration they both were passionate about. And they would sometimes really love to go at it on the floor. I mean, they would go at it. But then they would walk off the floor and go, that was pretty good, wasn't it? Because it was never personal. And boy, do I wish those days were here again.
But you're talking as though this was a really long time ago, and
Yeah,
and
no,
it's not really that
exactly.
long ago. When did you see the change in the Senate and in Congress in general?
Well, personally, for me, I think when Teddy passed, I think we began to see the ebb subside in all of this. And then with various older members that either didn't run again or did pass ultimately, it's just changed. I think Twitter and Facebook and all the social media have really not just changed but changed what's going on, but in a very bad way. This instant, where you can instantly whack someone, verbally on Twitter or Facebook is not a good thing. It's not.
And both of you talked about the fact that you knew each other, that spouses knew each other, and that members knew others'
Absolutely.
spouses. And how do you think that modulates conflict?
I think it makes a huge difference. What I found is that we had a Senate spouse lunch, and Senate spouses would go to a lunch and get to know each other. And I found that if I would develop a friendship or have work on a committee or do something with a Senate spouse, that Teddy invariably would go to the husband, and it was husbands primarily, and Teddy would go to her husband and say, "Oh, our wives are having lunch. What do you think they're talking about? What do you think they're doing?" Because he was that way, he kind of teased, and they would develop a closer friendship. And they would maybe find something that they would work on. But it was an entree. The relationships of the spouses was one way that you could begin to have something to talk about with someone on the other side of the aisle and start to develop a relationship. Yeah. But it was all about relationship building and having a face-to-face conversation with someone, getting to know them as a person, getting to know their families. Yeah. That's what I think is missing, because if you don't know someone's family, if you don't know someone as a person, it's really easy to have a caricature, don't you think, Cindy? I mean, just to say, oh, this person is this one-dimensional kind of caricature, and you don't need to know them or think of them as a human being.
Well, I mean, after all, these are members of Congress, members of the Senate, and we're all human in the very end. So not just getting to know one another, but getting to know, it's a very unique situation in Washington. That's kind of an understatement. But it's a very unique situation in Washington, and it can be very daunting at times. And having I'll use the word sisterhood because it was primarily women, was very important.
Very.
And didn't matter what side of the aisle you were on, a friend was a friend.
So both of you have a really heavy responsibility as the keeper of your husband's legacies. And these are profound legacies. And they both had long and varied and rich careers that focused on any number of areas. Just, you could write a list as long as that table. And so how did you, when you were approaching this responsibility of preserving your husband's legacies, how did you choose? How did you know what perhaps he would have wanted you to do, and what part what role did it play in terms of what interested you as well?
Well, I feel very fortunate because, we have the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate on Columbia Point, but it's something that Teddy helped to create and think through long before he got sick. So it was something way back in 2002 we started thinking of, because he basically wanted people to love the Senate as much as he did. I don't think that's possible. But he thought that if particularly young people could come in and understand how the Senate worked, and he wanted a full-scale replica of the Senate chamber, which we have. They could walk in and feel the awe of men and women of goodwill, both parties facing the greatest challenges, addressing the greatest challenges that we had in our nation. He thought if they could come in and feel that, that they'd be inspired to try to do it again. And that's really what the whole goal was, and working together, solving problems, understanding how our government worked. And he thought if we could inspire people to do that, then they would want to vote and care about our country, and then go back in their communities and be involved. So that's really how it developed.
And Cindy, how did you start thinking about it? Because again, Senator McCain was interested in so many different things.
Well, fortunately, I had the opportunity, he and I did, to plan this. And this is long before we found out that he was ill. And so we knew, and it was definitely a joint participation with both of us, because we knew that his character and the kinds of leadership that he had exhibited in tough times and in making the tough decisions that were not popular. It takes a certain kind of person that stands up to that, much like Teddy was and others, to make those decisions, the tough ones. And so he knew that he wanted to first of all, bring people from around the world, not politically, but to learn what's important, why you have to make a tough decision, to become a leader in a country. Maybe those people would have a little bit of an influence.
And tell us a little bit about that program. Tell us how that's structured.
Well, we call it the Next Generation Leaders, and we bring people from mid-career from around the world, and they spend a year in Washington. And we place them, though, in various, sometimes in their professions and sometimes not in their professions, around the country, and then we get them together 5 or 6 times a year. And it's proved to be very successful in that we call it character-driven leadership. The things that mattered to him, of course, defense, foreign policy, freedom of the press, security issues, and then, of course, my issue, which was human trafficking. So we used to joke about it. Well, my side, human trafficking, that's what we're doing today. And his side, that was not the way it was, but it was. So fortunately, we had that time to talk about it. And we had that time to really plan and really do what his vision was for all of this, and that's important. That was important to me.
And why do you think that he was particularly inspired by or motivated to try to train these global leaders? And what was he hoping they were going to discover during their year here in the U.S.?
I hope that they have discovered. In fact, I believe they have. They have discovered the importance of character in government. And because John, like Teddy, dealt with some thugs around the world and guys that would not make the right decisions for considering their people, et cetera. You know the people I'm talking about. So it was important to him that with these young people that he at least inspire them in one way or another to help them be better leaders.
And what do you think that Senator Kennedy really wanted to do? I know he wanted people to love the Senate as much as he did. That's okay. But I know he also wanted to inspire civility. And so how is that connected? And how do you evoke that?
I would say that we wanted to inspire civility more than he said he wanted to inspire civility, quite honestly.
Because that's your part.
Yes, I would say that's really kind of the spirit of Teddy. So when in really creating the Institute, he said, look, this isn't about me, although we have things about him in it. He said it's about the Senate, it's about government. He wanted to explain how government worked, how legislation happened. But I wanted to infuse it with the spirit of Teddy. And so how do you do that? And so that's really where the civility and working across the aisle come in. Everyone knows he was a passionate partisan. I mean, he loved to, wax eloquent on the floor and care about, but he worked across the aisle to get things done. Again, it's finding that nugget of common ground. Excuse me. So that's really such a key part of what we do. If I could give an example.
Yeah, please. What would a typical visitor be, and what would their experience be?
We have a big wait list now of schools to get in. A very, very popular program called our Simulated Senate program. and students come in, up to 100 students, they prepare. It's a few 2-3 hour experience. And they come in and they become senators. They're assigned a state, they're assigned a party. So they are forced to put themselves in someone else's shoes. They understand what their constituents believe, what their party believes. They have to reconcile with what they believe. And then they have a piece of legislation or an amendment that they have to adopt based on either a current topic or a historic topic. It could be the Compromise of 1850, which we've had in the past, or it could be immigration, it could be healthcare, it could be, we've even had the Farm Bill, other pieces of legislation. And they have to work together to be able to get this passed. And they have to put aside their own beliefs in a lot of cases. And they have to listen to other people. And we do it in a fast-paced and lively way. They've got technology, but they have to meet each other and talk and work, and it's facilitated. And that's where the civility comes in. And if it's my way or the highway, nothing gets done. And they realize that pretty quickly.
Well, and I know that you've really focused on the experiential learning piece of this, that it's important for them to be in that persona. Do you tell them that they should be civil or they won't succeed?
I think that they kind of figure that out pretty quickly. I mean, they know they have to talk to people, and that we even have an exhibit that shows that if you only get, that even youngest children can have, it's how you pass a little piece of legislation on what the national topping is for ice cream. It's just kind of really quick. And if you, the Senate has yummy things, but the House has things that aren't so tasty. And if you only go in your compromise with what the Senate wants and not with any of the toppings from the House, which are things like, raisins and orange slices as opposed to, sprinkles and whipped cream, you don't get legislation passed. So you find out very quickly that you have to come together, and you have to listen to what other people say.
And Cindy, do you find that obviously your institute is also very focused on experiential learning, literally putting people out into the country for a year to have those experiences?
Yes, it's really the only way that you can learn, in my opinion, and the way that both they have done and what we're trying to do is exactly the same thing. People need to, it's really easy to be a Monday morning quarterback at home in your armchair and say, well, they should have done this. Why aren't they doing that? But when you really experience it, especially with these young people, then of course they not only realize that it's important to compromise, but it's also important to lead with character. And I will say too, with regards to what we do at home, our institute is completely open source. So everything that we experiment with, or we manuals, with human trafficking, et cetera, for schools, everything is online and it's open book and it's free of charge, which is exactly what John wanted and what I wanted too. So it's the experiential part of it spreads that way.
So if I could ask you something more personal, I'd like to talk a little bit about grief. And about how that changes people. And I'm interested in how did your loss change how perhaps you saw the world, or perhaps what you wanted to do with this next part of your life?
Well, grief, everyone experiences it differently. Everyone has a different experience no matter what it is. For me, the beginning portion of it, I felt very lost, and I felt very like there was no safety net for me, and that was not true, but it was just how I felt. But what it's inspired me to do even more now is to not just continue John's legacy, but make sure that for the long term, we're in this for the long term, and make sure that his legacy not only survives but thrives in all of this. And that's a large part of what I do now, is not just his legacy, but of course our institute and the library that we're building too.
Yeah, Vicki, how do you how do you think about it?
I think one thing you realize is that grief is very personal, but at the same time it's universal. Everyone goes through grief, and they go through it in a very, very personal way. Cindy and I, and as shocking as it is to think about, that both of our husbands died of the same thing, which that just is mind-boggling to me. They happened to die on the same date. The same date. I mean, that to me is mind-boggling. You know, and we've been
The four of us are bound now.
we're just bound forever. I mean, we were bound during. It's unbelievable. But so with all of that similarity, our senators, our spouses, that connection, our communications, it's still all very individual and personal, but again universal. I think that grief makes you take stock. I think it makes you take stock and kind of focus on what's important. When I'm at my best, it makes me more patient. And I try to do that.
If I may say too that the same date, the same disease took both of our husbands, and we both had to deal with this in front of the world.
Yeah,
That's right.
And there's a whole different element to dealing with it, but then having to do it and make sure that you held it together for your family and other things that you endure during those times. It's hard for anybody, but to do it on the television set every day was doubly hard.
And it changed your role tremendously, because while you're both enormously accomplished in your own lives, you had these very prominent, very high-profile spouses, and then suddenly it was your responsibility
That's
in
true.
some ways to fill
That's
those
true.
shoes.
That's true. I
And-
think for both of us, our role in life, even though our roles might not really have changed, at least in
No,
a
it
public way, our roles did.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And how did you feel that public attention differently afterwards, or did you?
I kind of think I was in a fog, so to be quite honest.
Yeah, I was too. There's a lot that I remember about it and a lot I don't remember about it.
Yeah.
And so like everything, your mind has a way of protecting you a great deal. I think once you come out the other side and the new normal hits, it's a new normal now, and getting used to that new normal and getting used to it for your family too. So we had a son deployed when my husband died, and so it complicated things in some ways because he couldn't spend time with him because he was overseas.
Right. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So, Vicki, I understand that when Joe Biden's son died, you passed along a note of advice to him from your family. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. It wasn't really advice. It was just I wrote a note after Bo died, who happened also to die of the same disease that our husbands died of, which is just also unbelievable. But I just shared with him a letter that meant a lot to Teddy, that his father, who had lost 2 children of his own he'd lost 3 children of his own during his lifetime, but he wrote this in the late 1950s after he had lost 2 of his children. One son in World War II and a daughter in a plane crash later. And he wrote to a friend who had lost his son, and he said, I can't tell you that I know how you feel, because no one could tell me that no one knew how I felt. But what I can tell you is that when I didn't know whether life had meaning, I found meaning in what I thought my children would have done with the rest of their lives. And maybe that's what makes it all worth it, something to that effect. And I just shared those words with the Vice President, and he has said and shared those words again, and that it meant something to him to try to find meaning in what Bo would have done with the rest of his life has been inspirational to him.
So both Senator McCain and Senator Kennedy were enormously optimistic, and they showed a lot of perseverance. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on where can people find that sense, that reservoir of optimism and perseverance today? How do you find it? How ought others look at their legacy and find theirs?
I think it was a defining aspect of Teddy's life. His perseverance, his optimism, I think much of it came actually from his deep religious faith. It was, he wasn't something he wore in his sleeve, but it was something that was profound, and it was something that kept him very grounded, and also kept him persevering. It was absolutely who he was, and he kept his kind of focus on, this is something important, this is something I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep going. I'll tell you just a wonderful persevering story that makes me smile to think about. In the spring of 2009, Teddy threw out the first pitch for the Red Sox. He was sick. It was, but it was exhilarating. I mean, this was like the greatest thing. He could not believe how wonderful this was. He was throwing out the first pitch for the opening day. Opening day first pitch, not just any game, opening day first pitch. So he had practiced, and they said, you're not going to be on the mound. You're not going to be on the mound. You're going to be just a little short thing, and you've got Jim Rice. He's going to catch. It's going to be just terrific. So he was all decked out, and he was ready, and he had just like his little thing, and he gets out there, and they put him on the mound. Now, this was different. This was different because he was not, he had a brain tumor, the coordination was not quite, but so he threw the first pitch and it went in the ground. So Teddy said, I want to do it again. It's only he could do. And so he said, all right, one more. So Teddy, he did another one. He told our grandson that night, he said, I would have stayed out there all day until I got it right. And you know what? He would have, because he said, that's what we do. We stay there all day until we get it right. And that was his life. Yeah. He was just going to stay there until he got it right. Yeah. It was really fantastic.
And obviously Senator McCain was the epitome of optimism and perseverance. Can you talk about where that came from for him?
He learned that as a young man, as a prisoner of war, because it doesn't get much worse than being tortured every day in a place that was so hostile to him. So when he got out, he said, look, I've got nothing else. That's as bad as it's going to go. I'm happy all day long, every day. And he was. He would find humor and great grace in things that I'd be over kicking the wall because I was angry about it. And he would just be, this is great. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. But that's part of who he was, too. He saw great joy in things. And he, much like Teddy, just reveled in it and loved it so much that it was infectious with other people. It was really wonderful.
Don't you think that's something that they loved about each other, that connected them?
I do.
I really do.
I
think
exactly
they both
right.
had that same perseverance, and they both had that sense of humor, and it just connected them.
Wicked sense of humor, by the way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I will end then on a story of your husband's wicked sense of humor when we were signing, or when Governor Romney was signing the health care bill. I remember very vividly that your husband was looking on and he quipped, if both Mitt Romney and I are supporting the same bill, one of us must not have read it. Well, I would like, on that happy note, I would like to move to questions from the audience, because I'm sure that everyone is very anxious to join this conversation. So we have 4 microphones in different places. I see one there and I see one over there. Please identify yourself if you'd like to join the conversation, and limit yourself to one question that actually is a question with a question mark at the end. And unfortunately, the press is not going to be able to participate in questions. And that's it. So would someone like to join our conversation? If not, I will have to continue. Yes.
Hi, thank you for being here at the Kennedy School. My name is David Deming. I'm a director of the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy here. And my question is about the nature of the bond between Senators McCain and Kennedy. When I think about their relationship, which was evident, I think, to everybody who saw it, one thing that I think about that I don't see as much today in public life is a sense of common purpose, a sense that even if we may disagree on a specific issue, we're both united behind the idea of country over party, and in some sense, country over personal gain. And so my question is, how do we foster that in our young people here at the Kennedy School and around Harvard more generally, because it seems like it's so important to the functioning of government? Thank you very much.
Country over party?
Yeah. Country over party, country over state, country over everything else. I mean, I was reading John McCain's oral history. I was mentioning to Cindy, I've just reread it. I encourage everybody to read it. He did an oral history for the Edward M. Kennedy Oral History Project, and it's online, and you can read it. He said something that was so interesting to me. He said, there's a reason that we're called United States Senators, and then our states come next. And I think you can say the same thing with party. You know, the party is on, you always list their R or D, but that comes later. And they both had that sense that it was a higher purpose. It was about the country. How you pass that on, I don't know. That's what we're trying to do at the Institute. I mean, I think we all have an obligation. George Washington, in his farewell address, was very concerned about political parties taking away from, caring about the country. And I hate to think that that's where we are. I think it's a huge problem, and I don't have a solution, to be honest, except to come to the Institute. It's, we have to just keep talking about it and look to examples of not so distant future of statesmen and women who really did put country over party. I think we'll get there again.
I do too, and I think for this reason, we as voters, period, we should demand more. This is unacceptable, what's going on.
Yes.
It's unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. And I bet you our two husbands are up there right now just really going at it about this. They're upset about this.
Exactly.
But because of the nature of the lack of civility and the lack of honor and character that's being displayed, not just on one person, but an entire body, in my opinion. A body that our two husbands respected to a level that was beyond even understanding sometimes, and their honor and their dignity about this country was even more spectacular. So I think we as voters owe that to our country. We owe that to our country.
Yeah. And Vicki, I was taken by something you said earlier, and I can think of examples where Senator McCain did this as well, which was that your husbands looked for those little pieces of agreement,
Exactly.
right, in the interstices there. Yeah, and that was certainly the only way we could ever get anything done in Massachusetts, was because we were looking for that one thing you agreed on, as opposed to the 90% of the things that you did not agree on.
Absolutely. And there's another thing, not assuming a bad motive of somebody who believes has a different political philosophy from you.
Right.
That was a huge thing with my husband and with your husband. Just because you think that there's a different way doesn't mean you have a bad motive. And we have to get away from that. People who think differently from us are not bad. That doesn't mean they're not patriots. This cannot be sustained. That's all. It can't.
Well, there's a pendulum too. I think this is much like a lot of things that have happened through the years. It swings like a pendulum, and we're going to come back. I really believe
I think
that.
you put your finger on it. Voting.
Yeah.
Everyone just has to vote, and hold people to account.
We have a question here.
Hi, my name is Aviv Had, and I just wanted to say both of your husbands were incredible leaders. They've passed on. Now, if they were magically back and they were in top form, given all of the challenges that we're talking about with partisanship and everything, what would they actually do? What would they be hitting the floor doing to start healing us?
Action steps?
Well, you know, one of the things we've talked about, I mean, the Senate is when it works, it's a very procedural place. So there's something called, regular order, committee work, committees work, routine kinds of things but things happen. So, for example, when the Democrats are in charge, Teddy was the chair of the HELP committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. When Republicans are in charge, he was the ranking member of that committee. He was on other committees as well, as we talked about. But what happened? That committee did unbelievable amounts of things, funding, NIH, education, other things, healthcare. But how? When you've got Republicans and Democrats together, they worked together. Example, no matter who the Republican was on that committee, they would sit down, they'd work together, and they'd say, okay, give me your list of priorities. Teddy would always make this. Give me your list of your top 5 things that you want to do. I'll give you the list of my top 5 things that I want to do. Let's see if we have any overlap. Oh, look, we overlap on 2. Let's get our staffs to start working together and see if we can get these things done. Mike Enzi of Wyoming, certainly was very conservative senator, worked with Teddy back then. Mike told me that all of their legislation out of their committee passed with nothing less than at least 80% vote in the Senate. And they got tremendous amounts of things done. Now, that's not the dark ages. We're talking 10 years ago. So that's an example of just having regular order in the Senate and having a system that works. I think that John, one of his last acts was standing on the floor and talking about regular order.
It was.
I mean, don't you think that that's something he would have been passionately advocating? I think that that's what they would be doing, saying, let's go back to having the Senate be the Senate.
People often ask me that too, and that's exactly what I tell him. He'd be begging for regular order right now.
Let me go up to the balcony.
Thank you both so much for being here. It's always such an honor to hear from such eloquent and inspirational role models as yourself. My name is Sahar. I'm a sophomore at the college, and both of you have talked extensively about education playing a key part in your careers, also in the career of your former husbands, especially in the committees, as you just mentioned. What role, if any, do you think education plays when striving towards bipartisanship when you're passing on the paths of civic engagement in youth education, in university for college students like ourselves? Is there room for education to start having these conversations about bipartisanship and solution seeking more seriously?
I think bringing back civics education in public schools is very important. I know in my home state they pulled it. And that's, it just simply, we can't do that. And I know that wasn't exactly what you were asking, but it really is, because how are we going to help our students and our communities understand the importance of serving your country in the United States Senate or any other way, unless they understand what civics education is, what it actually is and what it does, and how to do it. I know that funding issues are everywhere, but that's one that I would say hang on to, and that is not the case in my own home state.
I want to echo that, and I think you have to have first steps before you get to a discussion of bipartisanship. You have to know how your government works. Right. And we have an unbelievable lack of knowledge in the country, even with college students, as to how the government works. Mm-hmm. In terms of 3 branches of government, I think that there are studies that show that only 1/3 of Americans know that we have 3 branches of government. And less than 1/3 can name all 3 branches. They don't know that we have co-equal branches of government. Honestly, I don't know if everyone who is serving in government knows that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. No, I'm very sincere about that. I am very sincere about that. So it really starts with that, and to understand how our constitutional system works. And once you understand that, then you can start taking it to the other level. Once you really know how it's supposed to work, then I think bipartisanship and civility and start to flow from that.
If I could add on to that a little bit and push you a little bit further, because I think obviously what you said is right, but is there a role for higher education or high school education to promote a diversity of ideas?
I actually do think so, yes. I think it's an important thing. I will go out and perhaps shock people that I'm saying this, but yes, I do. I think you need to be exposed to a lot of ideas. You cannot have just one idea that you're hearing. You need to hear a diversity of ideas. You need to debate a diversity of ideas, absolutely. So that you know what you really believe. It's important.
I agree. I think it's also, not every school has a nurturing environment with regards to just that, encouraging different ideas, different thoughts. And those are the things I think, especially at the high school level, and I think sometimes at the college level, we're missing, is the spirit of debate, but also the spirit of agreeing also and disagreeing. It's something that I wish we had more of, and I think I wish in at least education for teachers that would be a part of what we would do.
But can I say this, Kerry? I think you can have a diversity of ideas and debate, but in a civil way.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the most provocative person on either side who's insulting and rude and makes people feel unsafe and unwelcome. Do you know what I mean? We tend to go to extremes and say, but there's other ways to do it. You can have vigorous debate on hot topics, which can be fun.
Both of you talk a lot about dignity, and I think that
exactly
is part of the core
exactly.
there, is how to debate with dignity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me go up here to this balcony.
Hi, I'd just like to expand upon, my name's Blake, I'm a sophomore here at the college. I just wanted to expand on a question that you answered earlier about putting country over party, which I agree with. How do voters balance when they see candidates with one, they have a crisis of character, and the other where they have a crisis of ideas, where they feel they fundamentally disagree with the entire direction that they would take that country and fear it would hurt them and their family. But in the other candidate, they fear that they have fundamental disagreements about the way they live their life. I'm sure this is not applicable at all to a current situation.
Can I tell you what I think? I think a major crisis of character is extremely problematic. And I believe in checks and balances on policy. And I think that's why we have a Congress, hopefully, that works. And I think that hopefully we have courts that will do their job. You have two other branches of government. But I think that a crisis of character with a bully pulpit and on the world stage, at least from where I sit, is tremendously problematic.
I agree, and a crisis of character, or character in general, tells you a great deal about some of the obvious things, the obvious problems that there will be, but also about who that person is as a person and how he or she makes decisions. There's a lot to gauge when we vote, but more importantly, and I agree with this, character is extremely important, more so than other things in many cases, in my opinion. You have to look deep into the person. You do as much research as possible. You're reading, watch TV, whatever it may be, but I think it should be heavily considered in your vote.
Well, I'm interested in your response in particular because Senator McCain was considered a maverick, and that was certainly often how he expressed his unique ideas and opinions. Do you see people being willing to be mavericks in this environment, or is that as much a casualty as civility?
I think it is a casualty. I wish we saw more of it. I mean, I wish we had people that were mavericks that would step forward, take perhaps the unpopular topic and move it along, much like my husband would do. He would take the unpopular votes when he thought it was right. It wasn't about him or his party, it was about the country. And I know that's the case with Teddy. I think it's all, and if I might say, he loved the term maverick. He just thought that was really cool. He was a fighter pilot in his other life, so he loved that.
That was great. And so what allowed Senator Kennedy to be a maverick? Because he was as well.
I think it's just courage of his convictions. I think it's just what he believed. It goes back to, he knew what he believed. He wasn't afraid to compromise. He just didn't compromise his values.
Yes. Are we having a crisis of courage today?
Oh, gosh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Without question, don't you think? I mean, without question.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a crisis of leadership, a crisis of courage, absolutely, and it's a crisis. It's a crisis in terms of the voting population, because once again, it's up to us to fix this. We can fix this at the ballot box, but people have to pay attention, and I think the different ways of getting news, it can be also kind of difficult as well.
Here we are, at the Institute of Politics, and I can't not mention President Kennedy's Profiles in Courage book, and the whole idea was people being willing to risk their seat, being willing to risk for standing up for principle and for courage. Right now, I fear that too many people are more worried about re-election, and that becomes the motivation. When I hear, but the base is against this, and we can't upset the base, that really bothers me. Because is that really the test? Or is it what's right for the country? And goes back to that other question. What comes first? And that's maybe what, it's what do you believe? What is right for all of us, not what's right for your reelection. I just would like to see more people, and it's a rarity. I mean, I realize we're asking a lot.
This gentleman's been very patient. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ben Bolger. I'm a Harvard alum, and also a grad student. And I've always grown up thinking that experience matters. And both John McCain and Ted Kennedy had literally decades of public service experience. Any other profession, if it's a pilot flying through a rough storm, you would probably want a pilot with experience, like the gentleman that landed the plane on the Hudson successfully. Or if you're going into a serious surgery, you'd want someone who's not a rookie. So why is it that the public somehow is disaffected with people with experience in politics? I always think that that's an asset, and both of your husbands seem to be a great representation of experience in public service making a difference. What can be done to change that perception that long-serving politicians are bad? Because I actually think they're great sometimes.
Well, you make a very good point there. The experience does matter. It's, I think, a core element in all of this. I think all too often we tend to, again, all the social media, the news, we pick what's glamorous. Some people, their vote as well, he said something outrageous or did something outrageous, whatever it may be, and overlook the things that are the most important. That's an educational process that we need to undertake with regards to the voting population. For both of our husbands, both of them ran for president. Both of them lost. And I know in both cases knew they'd had a great run, They had done the right thing. They had lived, had done the very best they could, were kind to their opponent, which is even more important, and came out of it. It was the end result was maybe not what they wanted, but it was a good race, clean race, on the issues. You won't see that right now, I don't believe. I mean, you may disagree.
No, I do. I was just smiling when you talked about experience, because Teddy ran for the Senate when he was 30. And he used to say there was nothing like a young man with new ideas. Yeah. And then he said, later he started to say there's nothing like age, wisdom, and experience. I think the key is really whether you're still relevant and whether you're still engaged, whether you're phoning it in, or whether you're really still, hitting the ground every single day, working hard, and really getting things done. And I think for both of our husbands, they were every day hitting the ground, really working hard and getting things done. They were engaged in making a difference. And that's the test to me. And you could be in one term, or you could be in 7 terms. It depends on whether you've still got the energy and are still doing it. And there could be someone in their first term who really is still just phoning it in. So I agree with you. It's not about how long you're there. It's really about what you're doing with the time that you have there. And the truth is, the longer you're there, you understand the system. You understand the issues. You really know how to get things done. You've developed relationships. You have a depth of knowledge that you don't have at the very beginning, and you really understand what you believe in a way that you may not have known when you were really a very first elected. So it's a good thing. Thank you.
I also think learning to listen.
Yeah.
The ones that do really well, in my opinion, that are truly bubble to the top, are the ones that listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go up to the balcony.
Hi, thanks so much for being here today. My name is Rachel Lipson. I'm an alum, and I'm currently a project director here at the Kennedy School. I was thinking a little bit about one of the things that has been fun about this cycle is watching people in the role of potential presidential spouse who don't fit our traditional conceptions of what that would look like. And I was wondering to hear a little bit from you two about your reflections of how that role has transitioned over time during the period in which you both served in it, and also if you have thoughts on kind of for the public whether our expectations of that role should be changing.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think the role has changed greatly, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch the changes that are happening and seeing how the roles have melded around this kind of new beginning with everything. I still am a big believer in the quote, now don't get mad, in the traditional spouse, because like it or not, in a political family, you have to have support, and the spouse is the likely person that's going to do that. I do like the opportunities now that spouses don't always move to Washington. They stay at home in the home states. I think that's very important. That's a new development. That's new. I was one of them.
A negative development or a positive?
No, positive.
A positive
absolutely,
development.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very positive, in my opinion, because I think it keeps the member grounded and keeps them more centered on what's important. It's the state. It's your state. It's where you're from. But I also love watching the younger folks coming in and how they're doing this and how they see themselves in their role for the country. It's fun.
So Cindy and I will disagree on that, but it's good. And I know you like being in the home state, but Massachusetts was so close to to Washington that for us it was much better. I mean, for me to be in Washington with Teddy, but then we just zip right back to Massachusetts. I preferred that way, and so did he. I think it's an interesting role, depending on whether you're the spouse of a senator or if you're the spouse of a president. I don't think the idea of a totally separate career for the wife or husband of a president. I don't know how that would work. I don't think it can work. I think there are issues of conflicts that you have to be very, very sensitive to. I think that there are issues of conflicts even with the Senate. It's something you have to be aware of.
Well, and certainly that's been the case with you, with your legal work. You were not able to work on so many things.
And I think that, and I didn't have anything before the Senate, but I think that there are other people who do it very successfully. It was not possible for me to continue my legal work and be married to Teddy, although he was very encouraging and said you should continue, but it was, clients were, in the newspaper because they were my clients, and it wasn't possible to do. But I'm back practicing law.
You are. You're doing it now.
Practicing law now.
So we have a backup at the microphones, but we're going to, let's see, we've got about 5 minutes left. Can we just hear some of the questions, and then maybe you guys can choose which ones you want to respond to?
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I was just going to ask, who do you think today in the Senate is best representing your husband's legacies?
Okay, I like that question, so let's go. Lightning round.
I actually am not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
I'm not either, thank you.
Time pressure has caused us to pass that one by.
That tells you that was a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. That was a great question. Let's go here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us a glimpse into your own personal reflections on grief, which I found very moving. My question is, we've talked a little bit about being a political spouse, but what was it? Because you would have known about that role, right, before you got involved with it. So I wondered what it was that attracted you to a life of public service.
I think that's really funny because I don't think we really either of us. I didn't think of the role. I mean, when you go ahead.
I married a naval officer. I had no idea we were going to be doing what we did. So I thought we were going to be living in Florida or something. So for me, I grew up in it. We didn't have children when he ran the first time. We started having our babies right away. And anyway, so I grew into it. And it's much different than Vicki's experience was in it. Nevertheless, it's the one thing, you hear a lot, you read a lot about political spouses or whatever it may be. I'd like to remind everybody, we had a front row seat to history. Absolutely. Like none other. And every time I would get a little frustrated with things, I think this is really a unique perspective and a unique position to be in.
Yeah. I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world.
Yeah.
So 1 minute answers in these next two questions. Let's stay here but I promise I'll get to you. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I just have a very quick question. Do you think that the need to have a quick and fast answer and the streamlining of executive authority and decision making in our government is what's eroding people's appreciation of the Senate, where you debate an issue for a long period of time? And I just would like to ask you that question. Is it the fast pace of the global world that we live in that is eroding that appreciation?
Is the Senate too old-fashioned?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think it's a very interesting question. I think it's whether it should be streamlined, made more fast-paced. I think it's an interesting, provocative thought, and one worth considering.
I completely agree with that.
You could try it in your institute.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I'm looking at institute people in the front row saying, this is very interesting.
Speed deliberation. Last question.
Wow, no pressure, I guess. Thank you both for being here. I'm from Arizona, so particular appreciation for Senator McCain's service.
Thank you.
I guess the question I have in my mind is, what might you consider the most underreported aspects of each of your husband's legacies, and I guess, the joint legacies that you share together?
Thank you. Wonderful question to end on.
I don't know.
I don't either. I can't. Underreported?
Underappreciated, perhaps.
Oh, wow.
So it could be.
I'll say this. I don't think people really understand Teddy's work on armed services,
Right.
And his
Agreed.
work. I think that I think that's probably it.
And what would he have wanted people to know about that?
He wasn't really big on people knowing too much about much of what he did, to be quite honest. I can remember him running for re-election in one competitive race, actually against someone you know well, and people said, well, let's talk about your record, and he would just he said, oh, well, I just kind of move on from that. And somebody said, if you don't toot your own horn, no one's going to hear your music. And he thought, well, he just kind of moved on. So I'm not sure he was really focused on what other people would know about what he did. But he was very focused on our troops and on them having the proper equipment, on having the proper armor, on being adequately equipped. That was something very, very important to him.
And is there an underappreciated piece of
very
Senator
much
McCain's
so.
legacy?
John was, all through his career, remained on the Interior Committee and remained careful about certainly the land in Arizona, land use in Arizona, but land use around the country. I don't think that he was ever truly appreciated for the work that he put in on protecting our national parks, protecting our land, our grazing, grazing rights are a huge deal out west, all those things. The amount of work he put into that, I think, was kind of when it was armed services or interior, who got the TV clip that night.
Well, Mrs. McCain, Mrs. Kennedy, thank you
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.